This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We begin today's programming with our weekly cattle market update, which is provided by Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel this week. He shares that beef demand is still holding up, production volumes continue to slowly decrease, and what he expects to see in the upcoming export data report. Also ahead, K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, discusses how to select and care for poinsettias throughout the holidays and even beyond. Also ahead, Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University and host of Kansas Profile, recently profiled the new state-of-the-art processing plant being built in Kansas by Hilmar Cheese Company based in California. We end with a conversation on ducks for our weekly wildlife segment with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Specialist Joe Gerkin. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly cattle market update, and this week we are joined by Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. So, Derrell, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate you, as always, joining in on our show and speaking with us. So, fed cattle, what did we see in this past week? Anything interesting?
You know, it looks like fed cattle were up $1 to $2, a little bit of strength in that market. And so that kind of, continues a trend. I think we're going to end the year on a fairly strong note with these fed cattle markets in general. And so that part looks good, yeah.
Excellent. Well, I know things haven't been too chaotic in general across the market, but feeder cattle, anything crazy there?
Feeder cattle markets dropped a little bit back in October, but really from an unusual high coming into the fall. So not a very pronounced fall low, and then they've since lifted back up a little bit. This past week, at least in Oklahoma, it looked like the markets were steady to a little bit higher for feeder cattle. And, one of the reasons that we're seeing some support there is that the runs, this is the big season for fall calf runs, and those numbers are seasonally higher compared to earlier weeks. But because we moved so many cattle early in the summer, and I watched these weekly volume numbers all summer, they were up year over year, and 4 out of the last 5 weeks we've had year over year decreases in that feeder cattle volume in Oklahoma at least. And so, and that's exactly what we expected. We just moved the cattle early. So the runs are not as big this fall. We just don't have the cattle out there. They've already been marketed.
Sure, and we kind of expected that going into the season, like you said, with such large volumes earlier in the summer than normal. But, that means obviously that now as we expect to see higher volumes, we're not seeing that. So when we expect volumes to decrease, we're going to see that even more significantly sooner, right?
Yeah, these numbers are going to continue to tighten, as we go forward. We've been kind of spending the whole summer because of the drought impacts. We've changed the timing on these cattle, but we've worked our way through a lot of that. I think as we finish out the year and move into next year, it's going to become much more apparent on a general sense that numbers are really tight in the industry. I think that'll be reflected as we go forward in the feedlot production and feedlot numbers and cattle slaughter. 2022 is going to turn out to be a record year for beef production based on higher than expected slaughter. But it's all because the drought kind of pulled cattle forward. And so once we move through that, I think we're going to see a fairly dramatic change in this thing to tighter numbers for cattle slaughter and for beef production. Certainly as we go into 2023, we may not see it too much yet here at the end of the year, but it's going to be really close if we don't see it.
Sure, especially come, like you mentioned, going into 2023, that spring calving season, we'll see probably a drastic reduction in calving numbers even then, right?
Yeah, I think we will because, obviously all year we've been tracking cow slaughter, which is still running more than 12% up on a year-over-year basis, and that's on top of a 9% increase last year. And then heifer slaughter has been elevated this year on top of a higher level last year as well. So, we've really taken a bite out of our female side of the industry. We'll have to wait and see what USDA says about the January 1 numbers. We won't get those till about the 1st of February, but I'm pretty sure it's going to show a significant decrease in the beef cow herd as we go into 2023.
Sure, absolutely. And we spoke of a tightening market here, but we also see consumers tightening their wallets, I feel like, in a lot of ways. Obviously, inflation is starting to take a hit. It has been for a while now, but we're really seeing the effects of that now. Are we seeing that in beef demand any?
Surprisingly, we haven't seen a lot of impact on the beef side. We've certainly been watching it and expecting that we might see it. If you look at the, the most recent monthly retail beef prices as reported by USDA, October was down a little bit from the month before, and the actual peak in that numbers was a year ago in October. So, we're off a little bit, but if you look at it across the year, retail beef prices have been remarkably steady. Wholesale beef prices have been steady through the year. And so, we don't really see a lot of impact. I look at individual beef cuts, across the board, and we talk about consumers trading down when things get tight and they're under some financial pressure. And, I really can't find a lot of evidence yet that consumers are having to trade down. Now, I think there's a better chance that we'll see some of that going forward because, again, we are expecting beef production to drop here at some point. Supplies will get tighter. That's going to put even more pressure on these retail beef prices, wholesale and retail. And that may lead to more consumer adjustments as we go forward.
With the tightening of the beef supply, when do you really expect to see, if you were to, peer into a crystal ball here, those beef prices really elevate further than what they already are now?
Well, I think it's going to build, pretty continuously from this point forward. Again, we haven't really seen beef production start to drop yet. We expect it to happen. So it may not be before the end of the year, but certainly as we start into next year, we really expect cattle slaughter will start to significantly drop. Beef production will start to drop, and that's going to really put some additional pressure in these markets.
Speaking of pressure, we spoke about last month when we had the latest numbers released for exports. They were down in September. That was the latest report, obviously, that we had gotten, and we have gotten up to this point. But October numbers are going to be released soon. Are you expecting any major differences between September and October?
Well, we may see some continued pressure. The September decrease was the first decrease on a monthly basis compared to a year ago. And we're still up for the year to date if you add all the months together. And we've sort of been expecting to see some headwinds there. On top of the fact that prices are relatively high, there's lots of economic problems around the world, not just concerns in the U.S. And then we've had a really strong dollar, which makes our beef even more expensive to foreign customers. Now, we've seen a little bit of relief just in the last week or two on the dollar. It's backed off a little bit, but it's still fairly strong. And so we'll be watching closely as we go forward to see if we continue to see those headwinds that will maybe put some pressure. As we go forward, we talked about the fact that beef production is going to drop in 2023. Beef prices will go even higher. We fully expect that we will see a decrease in total beef exports in the coming year.
Sure. And we talk about, the decrease in beef supply that we're going to have. But I think it was the last time I talked with Caitlin McCulloch out of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, she had mentioned that cold storage was up. Do you think suppliers are kind of making bigger purchases now in preparation for that?
They are, I think. In fact, I've talked to a meat buyer recently, and they are building some stocks of imported beef. We also have had, because we've had large cow slaughter, I suspect the domestic supply of that lean cow beef that we use for the ground beef market is making up part of that. So, yeah, I do think there is a little bit of preparations, folks anticipating the fact that we're going to see the supply situation tighten up a lot as we go forward.
Yeah, not a bad idea, but I just wonder how long those, that proactiveness actually holds out for in this industry. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, in terms of cold storage, it's really not that much. I mean, if you look at the cold storage total, of course, the definition of cold storage is stuff that's in there more than 30 days. So it's not like it goes in and out, really fast. We turn over those cold storage stocks at a relatively slow pace. And the total amount of beef in cold storage is only about equal to 1 week of beef production in this country. So even if it all came out at once, it would be equivalent to about a week's worth of production, and obviously would have impacted if it did all come out in 1 week. But even then, the impacts would be fairly short-lived. So it's kind of an indicator of things, but it's in and of itself, cold storage stocks are not really a major supply concern.
Sure, yeah. Not the answer to this problem that we have. It's going to be a long-term problem. As you've mentioned in the past, it's not just something that's going to last for a year or so. This is going to take maybe 2 or 3 years to overcome.
As we go forward and see just how small the beef cow herd is, I think given the level of heifer slaughter we've seen, that we have really sort of emptied out the pool of replacement heifers, if you will. So I think it's going to be a long-term prospect. And that's assuming, of course, that we see some improvement in drought conditions at some point, and we stop getting worse, and then we can think about rebuilding after that. We don't know when that's going to start, but whenever it does start, I think it's going to be a relatively extended process to, start over, saving enough heifers. And, of course, we can cut cow culling pretty quickly, but the other half of it in terms of rebuilding the heifers and adding, retaining heifers for replacements, that's going to take longer and will occupy this industry for at least the next 2 to 3 or 4 years.
Sure, and you mentioned the drought there, but really, I guess the outcome of that drought is just a need for feed, right? So grain prices are extremely high right now. Forage availability is extremely low. So is that what we're really hoping for, is for that to be replenished and for that area to be fixed at some point?
Yeah, I mean, right now, folks are, if they haven't already figured out how they're going to get through the winter, they're still working on that. I think most producers at this point probably have got that kind of taken care of. If they've had to liquidate cows, they've probably done most of that. So we're looking ahead to next spring. And obviously, if we can get some moisture over the winter, that will help our expectations for next spring. But it's really going to be once we get into the springtime period and start really assessing what the prospects are for the next growing season. That'll really determine kind of what the situation will be in the coming year.
Absolutely. I know winter just started, but this Alabama girl is already looking forward to some green grass in the spring. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Derrell, as always, I can't thank you enough for your expertise and your insight on our cattle market update for the week. I really do appreciate your time.
I'm very happy to help out.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel providing information for this week's cattle market update. We will be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. Well, due to the shortened Thanksgiving holiday broadcast week, we've moved this week's horticulture feature to today. This week, K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, offers some advice on selecting and caring for one of the most popular Christmas plants, the poinsettia. Gregg's starting to see poinsettias all across town, and really this is the time of year when we think about that because it's kind of that annual holiday plant.
It is. I think once the turkey is carved, we're starting to think about the Christmas season for sure, and poinsettias just seem to fit right in with our holiday decorations, and so oftentimes they even may be a housewarming gift or whatever at Thanksgiving time. So yeah, people are anxious to get maybe on to the next holiday after Thanksgiving.
I guess in terms of if you're giving it for a gift, what are some things you look for to make sure that it's really the poinsettia that you think it is or that it's going to be healthy?
Yeah, so, we really see the bracts, those colorful modified leaves, if you will, that we see. And red is still the most popular, although there's lots of options nowadays. And so what we're looking for is the flower itself, and that's going to be inside or the middle of those colorful modified leaves. And so typically this time of the year, it's not going to be probably a real concern. They're going to be fresh or young and ready to go. But you do want to look at the flower itself. It may still be in a tight bud. As they open up, they turn yellow, and that may be more familiar with poinsettias to have a yellow center, if you will. But we'll make sure they're there. Even if they start to drop off, which they do later in the growing season, it's not really a distraction. But you probably want a young, ready-to-go poinsettia if you're giving it as a gift or going to enjoy it through the holiday season.
And these come in a variety of sizes.
That's true. So some of it's genetics, but some of it may be in the management or production of the poinsettia. So they may be in a smaller little pixie type, if you will, or a very large, beautiful plant, and it just depends on the space and the kind of care that you can maybe give that plant.
And then we also want to be careful in the transportation of this, either back to our house or to our neighbor's house.
That's true. They are from the subtropics or Central America, and so they do like warm temperatures. And so oftentimes we have some cooler temperatures when we're either selecting and bringing it home or maybe even when you have it in the home. And so You want to make sure it stays probably above 50 if you can, and warmer's better. But if you're going to purchase one and it's cold, you want to make sure you wrap it up the best you can. Usually they come with a sleeve and some protection there, but probably want to pick it up on your way home so that you don't have other errands or shopping that you need to do and put it in a cold car for a very long period of time.
So once we get it home, then what's the process for making sure that we can make this last as long as possible?
They are very sensitive to the temperatures again, and that may also include warm, hot, dry air coming out of a furnace vent or something like that. So you want to put it in a location where it doesn't get too many drafts, whether it be cold drafts from opening a door or, again, that hot vent on the plant itself. And so keeping it away from that. Moisture is important. We don't want to overwater them, so we want to make sure we have drainage. Sometimes some of the wrappers around the container or something like that does not allow for that extra water to get away, so we want to make sure that we're not overwatering our plants. Probably the best way to determine if you need to water a poinsettia is just to pick it up. And if it's fairly heavy, of course, we can wait a while, but if it's light, then we want to go ahead and add some. Probably room temperature moisture is best for it, so if you have a water can or something that you have, just fill it up and let it get to room temperature before you do some watering. We always want to water thoroughly so that you do have excess water come out of the bottom, but we want to discard that so it doesn't sit in water. It is prone to root rot, but that would take probably several times of overwatering to cause real problem.
I know it's hard to get any kind of sunlight this time of year, but is that something that a poinsettia needs?
It may be if it's something going to be a heritage plant or something you're going to try to extend. So it just kind of depends on your in use. So keeping the plant healthy with some bright indirect sunlight on that plant is probably preferred. But oftentimes, once the new year starts to roll around and we look at decorating for that season, maybe the poinsettia goes out in the compost, and so it's not going to be as particular on the light that it needs if you're going to keep it or if you're going to discard it.
Probably not something then that we'll need to transplant at any point. It's just kind of one of those where it's around for the holidays, and then, like you say, it may move on to another life.
That's right. I mean, if you can keep it around, it can become kind of a house plant or a perennial for you. To get it to bloom again, you're going to have to do some criteria next fall to make sure that it goes ahead and starts to flower. Now, poinsettias do bloom naturally around Christmas time, but we're still a month away from that, and we want it to bloom. And so you're going to have to do some modification for it to think that it's time to bloom if you want it earlier than in the actually Christmas season.
So a good time to start the process and get it into the house, get it acclimated, and enjoy throughout the holidays.
Yeah, they're fairly easy to take care of. You just follow a couple things. Don't overwater it and keep it away from drafts, and they'll definitely last through the holiday season and may continue on to the point where you're just tired of looking at it.
May last longer than that live Christmas tree.
It may, yeah. If you take care of either one, they should make it through the holiday season without too much problem.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Riley County, Gregg Eyestone, with tips for selecting and caring for poinsettias. You can also find more information on K-State's Horticulture and Natural Resources webpage, hnr.k-state.edu. And to fill out this segment of Agriculture Today, Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State and host of Kansas Profile, tells us about a new state-of-the-art processing plant being built in Dodge City.
Who Moved My Cheese? That was the title of a business book that was especially popular a few years ago as a parable of how to deal with change. Today we'll learn about a remarkable change that is coming to southwest Kansas, and it is literally about cheese. A new state-of-the-art cheese and whey protein processing plant is being constructed in Dodge City. It's today's Kansas Profile. Joanne Knight is Executive Director of the Dodge City Ford County Development Corporation, headquartered in Dodge City. She's a native of the region and a graduate of Dodge City Community College and the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute. Back in 1992, we started talking about recruiting dairies from California, where they were being crowded out by population expansion, Joanne said. Dairy recruitment became a successful strategy for the Western Kansas Rural Economic Development Alliance in following decades. As milk production grew in western Kansas, leaders wanted to add value and create more jobs. In 2021, Hilmar Cheese Company of Hilmar, California, announced that the company would build a state-of-the-art milk processing facility in Dodge City. We're excited, Joanne said. This will be a $630 million project and create 260 jobs, Joanne said. The average salary is projected to be $63,000, she added. The plant will operate 365 days a year and will have the capacity to handle 260 tanker trucks of milk per day, the equivalent of the production of 110,000 cows. They'll be bringing in milk from across the region, Joanne said. Hilmar Cheese Company was founded in 1984 by 12 local dairy farm families in Central California. In 2007, the company opened a production facility in Dalhart, Texas. The company is now one of the world's largest producers of high-quality American-style cheese and whey products. Hilmar is an incredibly environmentally sensitive company, Joanne said. One of the factors which attracted Hilmar to Dodge City is the city's innovative wastewater treatment system, which has won numerous awards. Milk is mostly water, Joanne pointed out. Once the cheese solids and whey are removed, that water will be recycled and reused. It can be re-irrigated and used in the biogas production system. They'll actually be injecting water back into the aquifer, she said. David Allum is president and CEO of Hilmar Cheese Company. Dodge City gives us many opportunities, including a local and skilled labor force, a supportive and expanding agricultural region, and an excellent transportation network that allows us to easily reach our expanding markets, Allum said at the time of the announcement in 2021. The company specializes in the production of cheddar and American-style cheeses utilized by private label and national brand companies nationwide. It currently produces such cheeses as cheddar, Monterey Jack, Pepper Jack, Colby, Colby Jack, and mozzarella. The whey is processed into whey protein products that are used as ingredients in many foods, including nutritional beverages and bars, and lactose, which is marketed internationally as an ingredient in confections and infant formula. Hilmar exports products to some 50 countries. Increased demand for milk will benefit area dairies, such as High Plains Ponderosa Dairy, near the rural southwest Kansas community of Plains, population 1,037 people. Now that's rural. Dairy production is so advanced these days, Joanne said. They're using robotic milkers and computer operators. They monitor 600 data points on each cow and can test the milk on the spot with their state-of-the-art system, she said. The economic impact will be compounded substantially by the additional dairies, transportation, and services that will be required, Joanne said. This could double the dairy industry in southwest Kansas, she said. For more information about the company, see www.hilmarcheese.com. For more information about business opportunities in the region, see www.dodgedev.org. Who Moved My Cheese? A few years ago, that was a popular business book about change, and now we're excited to see this change in the southwest region of the state. We commend Joanne Knight and the people of Hilmar Dairy for making a difference with this investment in value-added agriculture processing. I'm glad to see the production of this cheese has moved to rural Kansas. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Thanks, Ron. And additional Kansas profiles can be found on the K-State Radio Network webpage at ksre.ksu.edu/news/radio or by Googling Kansas Profile. This is the K-State Radio Network.
This is Agriculture Today. We are back again with Joe Gerkin. He is our K-State Aquatics and Fisheries Specialist for this week's Wildlife segment. So, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
So, we're talking about ducks today.
Yeah, switching it up a little bit, talking about our feathered friends.
Yeah, so we've got many different species of ducks that come through Kansas. What are some of those?
Yeah, so ducks are migratory species. There's specific areas of the country that they like to fly north and south on. So, colder temperatures, we start to see more ducks. That's great for hunters. Some people worried about water quality. There's some concerns there. So thought it'd be a good topic today. You asked what kinds of ducks there are. There's two main groups. There's dabbling ducks and there's diving ducks. And that's a fun distinction for people to learn a lot of times. So dabblers like to kick their tails out of the water. You'll see them with their heads underwater. They're looking around, trying to find food in shallower habitat. Examples of dabblers are some of the common species we think of. So mallard ducks, the ones with green heads. Teal, they're a little bit smaller ducks, or pintail. They like to dabble around in shallow habitats 18 to 24 inches or so and eat vegetation and little bugs primarily.
Cool. And then the other one, diving ducks, I'm sure the name implies exactly what they are, yeah.
Good job. You can be the wildlife specialist this week. So the diving ducks tend to have bigger feet, and they're really good at squeezing their feathers together. They get the air out between their feathers. That air is really important. That's what keeps a duck warm. And they have their bigger feet so they can dive deeper. And some of them are specialized to catch small fish. A lot of them are just going to deeper habitat to find different bugs or plant species to eat. So examples of that would be widgeon or redheads. Gansers are a really common one that like to go eat fish. So lots of really cool different species of ducks that we're seeing around this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, obviously, hunting being a large part of it, but they're also just cool to see out in your pond. So if listeners are tuning in and they're thinking, I want to make my pond a bit more desirable for ducks to come by, what are some tips for them?
Generally, ducks prefer clear water habitats. So we've talked about some of the steps that keep our pond clear. So things like keeping cattle out of the pond, for example, or making sure that we have desirable fish species and we don't have species like carp or bullhead that are going to make our pond really muddy. So if we have some clear water, that's going to allow a lot of different vegetation to grow. It's going to allow a lot of those invertebrates to really thrive. So there'll be a lot of food there. If you have the ability to raise or drain your pond, you can manipulate some of the plantings that you do in your pond to really attract those ducks. One important thing I want to mention, you can't add anything like grain or food for the ducks. That would make it illegal if you're going to hunt them. If it's just for sightseeing, some of that's allowed, but in general, it's probably best practice not to be actively feeding the waterfowl in the pond.
Sure, absolutely. And sometimes I know HOAs can be fickle about waterfowl being around. So are there any concerns of having too many ducks around?
Yeah, too many waterfowl generally isn't an issue, but it's definitely possible. And so the main concern is, they're going around and they're adding nutrients to the pond, which can happen. They can, in some cases, their feeding behavior can cause erosion. But for the most part, these animals are passing through, and it's relatively rare that we're seeing issues related to waterfowl.
Well, good to know for sure. And then avian influenza has been a huge issue, obviously, this year for sure. Any concerns over ducks coming in avian influenza?
And that's actually a fantastic point. One of the main concerns, those water quality, some of those concerns are minor, but this year avian influenza especially is being transferred primarily through waterfowl. Finding they're really susceptible at it, and it can spread like wildfire across these populations. So avian influenza is a big concern. We're seeing a really big concern with that with game bird producers. So producers that are raising pheasant or quail to then put out and hunt over in hunting operations. If avian influenza gets into one of those operations, they can have to kill their entire flock, which could be, for some of producers, hundreds of thousands of birds. So the transfer between waterfowl and upland is a huge concern. We want to make sure we're doing things like decontaminating our boots, making sure we're being safe and not mixing what we're doing with waterfowl with some of our other poultry operations or something like that. So be very careful if you go out waterfowl hunting or you're out near a pond where there are waterfowl, and then go back somewhere where we're raising birds. That avian influenza risk is a real risk.
Good biosecurity reminders for sure. But Joe, as always, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State Aquatics and Fisheries Specialist Joe Gerkin talking all things ducks. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.